and you listen to these names, right? Aaron Donald, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Micah Parsons, Von Miller, Cam Hayward, Jeffrey Simmons, Trey Hendrickson, Christian Wilkins, Grady Jarrett. I don't have anybody that even approach Calais Campbell, Josh Sweat, Leonard Williams, Montez Sweat, Harrison Phillips, Zach Allen, Carl Lawson. I mean, these are studs. I'm on the third page. No bear. I'm on the fourth page. Trevis Gibson is a 73 overall. That is your highest ranked Bears defensive lineman.
That's when it gets really difficult to talk about 9 and 8. You know? That's why I can't, in good conscience, go into this season saying that Justin Fields better lead them to a 9 and 8 record. You know, I heard a good promo from Mully and Haugh about, you know, that Justin Fields needs to show that he can win games and be and lead a team to a 500 record.
Yeah,
that defense isn't ready for that sort of thing. Defensive line is important in the league. Last I checked.
Well, so that to me is actually where the conversation gets a little interesting because we know it. We all said, like, what did they not address? Defensive. They didn't get a 3 technique who's a stud. They didn't draft an edge rusher.
They drafted a couple of kids who they're going to throw at the 3 technique.
Yes, but they didn't draft the generational prospects, right?
No, they did not.
They did not draft the sure thing.
Then they didn't spend the big money on the 3 tech.
Correct. Or the edge rusher.
Oh, yeah.
They do not have a good defensive line. They might have the worst defensive line in the NFL.
But they got big money linebackers, Danny.
And a very talented young secondary.
Yes.
They had a good back seven. So the experiment, the thing that we'll talk about with Dave Wanstead a lot, the thing that we'll talk about throughout the year, like, can the Bears be a good defense with a bad defensive line? And then can guys like Dexter and Pickens, who they drafted with 2 of their first 4 picks, can they be immediate impact interior defensive linemen? A very tough position to have an impact on as rookies. And so, but the next part of it, the next piece to me is everyone says it's time for Justin Fields to show that he's a difference maker. That's conventional wisdom. We're all going to be talking about. I agree with it. He's got to take the leap. He's got to show the difference. What about Matt Eberflus? Matt Eberflus was hired to be a culture guy and a defense guy.
Mm-hmm.
He changed what base formation they run on defense. They got rid of guys. They got rid of Robert Quinn. They got rid of Khalil Mack. They got rid of Akeem Hicks. They got rid of Roquan Smith. They have transformed the defense. And I know they still can't fix everything, and they don't have the DeForest Buckner, and they don't have the elite defensive linemen. But NFL head coaches get fired quickly in the NFL.
Well, but yes,
they do.
But he has been praised for his evaluation skills in the draft and his evaluation skills in talking about talent by Ryan Poles. So I think expectations should be that he gets more out of this defense than you might think they can get. I agree that those expectations should be there.
I'd be interested in quantifying that at some point over the course of talking to him, training camp, talking to experts. Like, what is the ceiling? And we'll ask Sam Monson in 15 minutes. What is the ceiling for a defense with a bad defensive line? Because if they're just going to give up 5 yards a carry, it doesn't really matter if you have good coverage linebackers and a talented secondary, right? Like, if you have the worst defensive line in the NFL that everybody can just run for 5 yards a carry on, it's going to be really tough to make impactful plays defensively. And I don't have the answer to it. I don't know. I would be very interested. Like, what is it? Can they be top 20? Can they be top 15? Because they can't be top 10. They can't. Like, their leading sacker last year was Jaquan Brisker, a safety who had six sacks, or was it 4? Brisker had 4 or 6 sacks last year. It was one of those low even numbers. They generated no passes.
Is 8 too high?
8 was way too high.
Okay.
It was either 4 or 6 for Brisker, and he led the team.
And not 2, right?
It's definitely not 2.
Then you're on it.
It was either 4 or 6. It wasn't 5. And it wasn't 4.5 or 6.5.
Okay.
It was 4 or 6. I just don't remember exactly right now. But no pass rush, no defensive line talent, but a coach who is supposed to coach up scheme and defense. I think that they've got a very low floor and low ceiling is what they can be as a defense. We were kicking this around in the last segment because the NFL Madden ratings are out, and no Bears defensive lineman in interior or on the edge is ranked highly at all, which of course we expect and agree with. What is the ceiling for an NFL defense with a bad defensive line?
Yeah, it's a good question, particularly when they've invested so much or, brought in a couple of these new players at linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds obviously coming off a career year, showed the potential that he's obviously had for years, and then T.J. Edwards coming along with him, who has a chance to kind of be a really sneaky addition, much less fanfare, but, was playing pretty much as well as Tremaine Edmonds last season, albeit with some slightly different roles and responsibilities. Now you're exposing those two guys potentially to, real problems with an offense that if it's not given trouble by that defensive line, like if the defensive line can't hold up and keep that offense, the offensive line off those linebackers, you really limit the potential impact those guys can have. So, if you have a really underperforming defensive line, then it's difficult to have any kind of high-level defense because everything starts up front, whether it's run defense, whether it's pressuring the quarterback, closing those windows because the quarterback's got to get rid of the ball quickly. It all requires having some kind of competent defensive line.
What did you think about the Bears offseason? I don't know if it's focus, but I guess it's the allocation of salary cap dollars on the linebackers with the way they did. They've got, two middles, essentially, that they'll be playing next to each other in Edmonds and Edwards.
Yeah, I was pretty critical of it at the time because, I was making the point that I felt like they should have gone harder after defensive linemen. I felt like that was the bigger need and would make the more immediate impact. And Steve Palazzolo on our podcast was constantly pushing back at the time saying, let's wait to see what they do in the draft. This could all be turned around with the approach in the draft. And they certainly addressed it in the draft. They went after a couple of these guys, Gervin Dexter, those additions that they made, but they didn't exactly, immediately transform it in the draft. Like they didn't come out of that draft with a Jalen Carter or somebody that would make you completely change your mind on how they had approached free agency and attacked their areas of need that way. So I still think it's probably going about it in a slightly backward way, reverse way than I would have liked to seen it done. But they kind of fix everything if they got their picks right with those interior defensive linemen in the draft.
We're talking to Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus. Yeah, I'll be very interested to see if anyone can come up with a comp for like top 15 NFL defense with terrible defensive line because the whole league really well, obviously. Do they have the worst defensive line on paper in the NFL?
They're the only defensive line I don't think that has one standout of some description. There's some bad defensive lines across the NFL, but every single one of them has got somebody that you can point to and say, okay, this is Grady Jarrett and very little else, or this is Aaron Donald and very little else. The Cardinals defensive line is pretty rough, but they've got a couple of young guys that have at least flashed so far, so maybe that ends up being a better unit. But yeah, it's certainly up there for the worst defensive line in the NFL.
Yeah, and the Cardinals are tanking.
Yeah, they're intentionally going that direction.